Hi everyone, hope you've all had a good week, and we've once again made it to another weekend. Although maybe the days for some of you are all running together, I can hardly believe that May is almost over and it's summer basically, right? So last week we were talking about prayer and the perspective of using that to committing to trusting God. So this week I just want to keep on expanding on that idea of trusting God with some actions and how to put that into practice. But before we get started, this week's social distancing champion is actually known for the time that she took a leap of faith and broke her quarantine and stopped being a social distancing champion, and based on her hope and ultimately her faith, she decided to step out of that quarantine world. And so this week's social distancing champion is going to be the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. And her story is where we're going to start off today in Luke chapter 9, verses 42 through 48. And as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." So presumably this woman had lived in isolation for the past 12 years due to the Jewish law that would state her medical condition makes her unclean. She would have to have stopped bleeding for a whole week in order to be deemed clean, and then she would be able to re-enter society. But unfortunately, it seems like she had 12 straight years of it, so she wasn't technically allowed to be near other people or have the risk of touching other people, much less in this very crowded situation. But as I'm reading this story, what makes her break these Jewish laws and possibly have severe consequences? What forces her to go out? How was she conflicted about her decision, and how does she know what voice inside for her to trust, right? Whether she should keep obeying the law or keep finding doctors, or whether she should explore her faith and give it a go and see if Jesus can be the healer. But we'll come back to these ideas, and maybe we can get a better grasp of where her story or where her faith came from when we take a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. This section in Ecclesiastes gives a certain perspective on this type of inner conflict resolution that we may go through. So some of the difficulties that we may have at making decisions, I think the teacher in Ecclesiastes gives a really good synopsis here of how to go about this. So Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. "Cast your bread upon the water, for after many days you will find it again. Give portions to 7, yes, to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain upon the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there will it lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant, and whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Sow your seeds in the morning, and at evening let your hands be idle. Let not your hands be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well." So this passage gives some really great advice on making decisions with faith. So first, the teacher goes in verse 1, and he teaches us that we need to have patience. Verse 1 says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again." So have patience even when you feel that you might be doing something as ridiculous as throwing bread on water. Other translations say that you'll get sevenfold back, or you'll get rewards back. But here's just advising us to, number one, have patience. Number 2 in verse 2, it's telling us to err on the side of generosity or to be thinking of others. Give portions to 7, yes, to 8, for you do not know what disasters will be coming for us. So make sure that you're giving to others. In verse 3, we get the advice of release the desire to control everything. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain upon the earth, and whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there will it lie. Of course, we would love to have control over the clouds when we're having a drought and we see these really dark clouds coming over and we want them to rain. It'd be great to have control over that, or we'd have to be able to control where trees fell so that they wouldn't crash into houses or cars or injure people. But here the teacher is telling us that these are all things that are outside of our control. If they're full of water, that's going to rain, right? It's something that we can't control. And so we can't, we've got to release this control, and wherever a tree is going to fall, that's where it's going to lie. In verse 4, number 4, it says to be weary that overanalysis can lead to inactivity. For whoever watches the wind will not plant, and whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. We can't be caught simply waiting for the perfect time to do something. We can't wait until all of the wind is gone to plant our seeds. We can't wait until the clouds are clear so that way we can do other things. There is no perfect time as far as analysis is concerned. It's just about doing what you're being called to do, right? Verse 5, it goes on to say, except that we don't know everything. As we do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. So this reminds me of in John chapter 3, starting in verse 8, Jesus is talking and teaching to Nicodemus. And he's trying to get Nicodemus to shift from this idea of needing to understand everything and instead finding faith in just simply believing. And it goes on to encourage us with the word, the famous words from John 3:16, right? Where it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish." Believes in him shall not perish, but has eternal life. It's not about understanding him. Whoever understands God, whoever can understand and fathom the love of God, will then receive eternal life. It's just whoever believes. So to accept that we do not know everything, this is going to take humility and submission on our parts. Lastly, the teacher in Ecclesiastes, he tells us that we need to be willing to move, to do something, and to trust that God will know which seed will succeed. So going back to John 3, verse 6. Sow your seeds in the morning, and at the evening let not your hands be idle, for you know not which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. So again, we gotta do something. But then we've got to trust God knows what he's going to do with the rest, right? And so this brings us back to John chapter 3. Jesus talks about loving the darkness, that we love the darkness sometimes and we hate the light. But yet we are still called to walk into the light. That's something active required on our behalf. It requires us to move. It requires us to have faith. Sometimes we have fear of the information that light can give us. We have this idea of what we don't know can't hurt us, right? Imagine being in a dark room. It's better to know that it's just dark than whether to know that the room is full of snakes and that can kill us, right? So sometimes we have this idea that the light actually sheds light on things that we don't want to see. But look what what Jesus says in John chapter 3 again, verses 21. He says, "But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God." That last part is key, done through God. So this is that same thing from Ecclesiastes 11, right? That we've got to relinquish this control, this idea that we're going to hold on to things, or this idea that if we move and do something, it's still something we have to control. We have to move, but then we have to trust that God knows what he's going to do, so that things can be done through God. So back to our bleeding woman, right? She followed this exact pattern laid out by the teacher of Ecclesiastes. It's really kind of neat. Number one, she had patience. She waited for an opportunity to gain access to Jesus with a reduced risk of her being noticed as an unclean woman in a public space. She waited until there was a crowd, so that way she can kind of blend in, so that she can kind of work her way towards Jesus. But then number two, she did think of others, right? And she was generous. She didn't ask for Jesus' specific attention. She tried to be as little as an intrusive person as she could. She tried to just touch the very edge of his cloak, knowing that there was others around that maybe needed something more than she did. She didn't try to inhibit others' experiences of being with Jesus. She simply just tried to touch his cloak and be done and be healed and be on her way. Number three, she released the control to Jesus. She refused to believe that she was beyond hope. She refused to believe that she was beyond healing. But at the same time, she released that control. She stopped trying to control her sickness herself and just gave that up into Jesus' hands and hoped that Jesus would be able to take care of it. Number four, she didn't overanalyze her situation. She didn't let the fear of breaking the law keep her from even going out there and trying. And she didn't let the fear of embarrassment of her situation keep her either from touching his cloak. I mean, maybe nothing would have happened, and then maybe that would have been equally embarrassing. But she didn't overanalyze the situation. She knew what her faith was. She knew what her heart was telling her, and she went with it. And then number five, she didn't have to understand how it would work to try it. Like, touching a cloak and getting healed, they don't really line up, right? It's not a direct medicine. It's not a direct remedy. Heck, Jesus didn't even know that she was about to do it. He didn't even know that was going to happen per se, right? She didn't have to understand how it was going to work. She didn't even touch Jesus. She just thought that his clothes would be enough, right? And she had faith in that. But she didn't understand the chemistry or the biology or any of the supernatural forces that would take place to bring healing. All she knew is that she was willing to submit to the unknown of what the power of Jesus could do. And number six, she was willing to move and to trust. She was first willing to go, but then we see her doing this exact step, willing to move and trust again, when Jesus calls her out in verse 47. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. She trusted that when Jesus called her out and called her into the light, that he would continue to have a plan for her, that he would continue to heal her or embrace her or to take care of her. She was frightened and scared, but she chose to trust nonetheless. She could have ran, she could have sprinted, she could have escaped, right? But instead, she chose to stand in the light. And that was important. That was probably her most important decision, because Jesus knew that she needed healing beyond just being physically healed. But she needed spiritual healing too. She needed to know that it was her faith that saved her. So that way, that could encourage her to keep going. It wasn't the miracle of the actual healing. Jesus, we knew, could heal people time and time again. But the fact that her faith allowed her to touch just the cloak of just the edge of his cloak, and that she received healing, that was faith in action. So these steps are relevant for us today as well, right? So we need to, number one, be patient. Number two, be generous and caring. Number three, release the desire to control everything. Number four, try not to overanalyze the situation. Number five, understand that you don't know everything and it's okay. And number six, be willing to move and trust in God. This all ties in with our last week in prayer. It's through prayer that we can gain the strength and the wisdom to carry out these very steps. These things go hand in hand. So God can help us through all of our trials, even this giant trial that we're facing today, but only if we're willing to see what exists in the light. I hope this week's message has been encouraging for you. This week's songs are Come My Way by Skillet. I had to pick this one because literally the song is about the woman that's been bleeding for 12 years. So it's an oldie but a goodie, and it relates fairly well. And then the second song I've picked this week is it's called You've Given Me Joy. It's by a band called You, Me, and the Bread. And this song covers the other half of our devotion today, the Ecclesiastes version. And so I think these two songs together kind of wrap up what we've been talking about today. And so I hope you all have an awesome weekend, and it was good to be with you for this little bit of time. Have a great weekend, guys. Bye.